Welcome to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast, which shares the stories, insights and people involved in the Scottish red meat sector. In this series, we will speak to farmers, vets, advisors, processors, researchers, hauliers, marts, butchers and retailers, as well as to the fabulous team at Quality Meat Scotland. I'm your host, Jane Craigie, and I'm looking forward to telling the stories that matter about the iconic quality livestock of Scotland and the people that produce, process and retail Scotch beef, Scotch lamb and specially selected pork. In this episode, I speak to Iain Macdonald, QMS's Market Intelligence Manager, about market trends and outlook for beef, lamb and pork, as well as to Sarah Millar, QMS's CEO, in a roundup of a new carbon emissions benchmarking project and what's coming up in the QMS calendar. Finally, I caught up with John and Alix Ritchie. With John about his passion about managing grassland, with some top tips as we come into peak grass growth, and to Alix about Farmstrong Scotland, where she is Programme Director. Here's Iain Macdonald. Thanks, Iain. Really good to see you. Thanks for coming back to this month's podcast with an insight into your world. My first question for you, as farmers are coming out of lambing, and thankfully they've got some grass growing at long last as the sun begins to shine. The talk before lambing was all about Easter and Ramadan and the market's been very buoyant. What's happening now and what's the outlook for lamb post-Ramadan and Easter?
So obviously a very difficult time for farmers lambing. Certainly those lambing outdoors at the end of March and even into the start of April. Maybe a little bit better for those that have been lambing later in April. But yeah, definitely a difficult time. However, on the markets, been the complete opposite, with record prices in the auctions in Scotland averaging close to £4 a kilo, some sales averaging above for hogs. Since the end of Ramadan, that was about 10th of April, things hadn't really cooled down that much. There's maybe been a little bit of a drop. That weekly average peaked above 390 and it's maybe dropped towards 370 and back up to 380. Those hog prices have still been really strong, just because the lack of supply in the market. Yeah, last year's lamb crop was down about 6% across Britain. Auction throughput, abattoir throughput held up quite strongly before Easter and Ramadan, and so there's really been a real shortage after the festivals. So that's sort of helped kind of stabilise the market. And those early new seasonal lambs, they've been selling above £4 a kilo on average. So yeah, it's still been a strong market. Really looking into the next few weeks, it's hard to see that changing too much, just because the lack of supply out there, because you had that smaller supply for this season and it's more front loaded. So yeah, likely to be tight supply. And with those new season lambs coming forward, I would expect that to be relatively tight as well. Well, certainly south of the border, we heard reports of difficult early lambings due to Schmallenberg, I think was the main factor there. I would imagine it's going to be pretty tight. And on the demand side, retail sales have been really strong last autumn, winter, around Easter. The issue for the sector is that that's come at discounted retail prices, which is completely opposite to what's been happening at the farm gate. So if that price pressure was to come through to the retail side, then yeah, it might be hard to see those good sales volumes.
Iain, have you ever seen anything like this before?
I guess with record lamb prices this year, we've not seen a market this tight, which in some respects is, I guess, positive. It's a positive signal that there is the demand out there to be supporting prices that much. We have seen years with different levels of supply. 2022, that was a year of record pricing with tight supply at this time. So yeah, we have seen the market get tighter this time, just not to the extent this year.
Meanwhile, in Australia, it's pretty harrowing, some of the content we're seeing on social media, with sheep being dispatched, being slaughtered and no value in the market and giving sheep away. What exactly is going on over there?
Yeah, so it's been really interesting, that divergence in markets. So Australia and New Zealand, you're talking price levels around £3 a kilo deadweight, which is such a huge difference here, where it's been above £8, even above £9 for New Zealand lambs. So yeah, much cheaper. Yeah, I guess the interesting thing is that those price levels have stayed so low for such a long period now. Such a difference between Europe and Oceania. I guess their local factors are increased supply in both Australia and New Zealand, particularly Australia, where I think they had about a 20% increase in production last year, and then expected to increase again this year. Chinese demand, so a good proportion of their export sales go into the Chinese market. Purchasing power has been hit quite hard in the last couple of years since coming out of COVID. Those seem to be the factors. It's just certainly surprising to me that it's just such a massive level of price differentiation between there and here, but it seems to have certainly been holding, and those higher prices in Europe and the potential for them to export more product here, that's not really brought anything closer together.
And moving on to beef, we've got some warmth and sunshine today. I see you're in a t-shirt and I'm thinking I'm a little bit warm in this hoodie. But with barbecue season coming up and the summer months, what's going to happen with beef and also, I suppose, lamb to a degree?
Yeah, certainly the weather has heated up a bit in the last couple of weeks, which has been very welcome with that ridiculously wet autumn and winter and spring. Yeah, I think people's sort of demand for beef is going to be completely changing, and people have been looking to have barbecues, and that obviously leads to demand changing from things like roasts and stews more towards burgers and different steak cuts. Every single year you've seen that switch in demand lead to certain factors in the market. I guess the underlying picture is that it's going to be a big switch of the balance of demand. I guess for the people trying to sell beef, then they'll be hoping that that demand is strong and they can get a good price for those steaks, which tend to be the higher value products, obviously.
What a wealth of information from Iain there, as always. Next is Sarah Millar, on a high after a recent win to recognise her many achievements. Morning, Sarah.
Morning, Jane. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Have you recovered from your big win at the inaugural National Women in Agriculture Awards? That was incredible.
It was so surreal and it still doesn't feel quite like it actually happened. I mean, it was such a strong category, not the least, Jill Hewitt, who does a huge amount of work with contractors, but also to have, the other formidable Miller woman from Angus, Caroline, in the same category. Isn't it just so great that everyone who was there on that night was a worthy winner? And I think that's just the great thing about seeing how far the industry has came over the last few years, because I do think that we are on the cusp of just great things, and that's all because we're using all the players that are available. You don't leave half your players on the bench. So I think the industry really feels like we're starting to kind of put words into action, which is really exciting.
It was just so lovely to hear. It goes without saying, but you are a young chief exec in quite a difficult role in a really busy and demanding sector. What have been your highlights? It's a really nice opportunity to look back over those 2 years having won this award. What have been your highlights in this role?
I've been doing quite a bit of soul searching, it feels like, over the last few weeks, because it has just been over 2 years since I came into the chief exec's role. And I think it's fair to say those 2 weeks have not been quiet. There's been plenty of challenges. And I would say that the highlights for me have probably, they've not been the kind of big things that are splashed all over the media. It's about seeing the team making incremental changes in doing things that are different and doing things for the benefit of the industry day in, day out. So when I meet, young butchers who are getting really excited about new product innovation or looking at kind of processors who are investing for the future, I love talking to people about why the red meat industry in Scotland is so special. And I love seeing the excitement in them when you kind of talk to them about why it's maybe not what they thought it was. So I would say for me, the highlights are definitely those kind of small everyday wins that all accumulate into everyone being as, passionate, as excited about Scottish beef, Scottish lamb and specially selected pork as I am.
And challenge-wise, Sarah, would have been the things that you've got over. So I suppose the positives taken from the negatives.
Anyone who is running a business right now knows how tough it is. There is no getting around that. And it's not just been one thing. When I first came into the job on the 11th of April at 9 a.m. back in 2022, I think one of the biggest things that was in front of me was that the pig sector were, as I described it at the time, not just coming out of a crisis, but coming out of the 4 crises that all landed on them within a kind of 18-month period. So I think that felt like at that point there was a chance we could have lost a significant critical mass of the pig sector. And we have lost good producers and pig numbers have dropped, but I do feel like through a lot of hard work, through collaborating with Scottish pig producers, through with processors, with retailers, we have started to build the foundations for really strong growth for the pig sector. Every business, because of how the wider world is behaving at the moment, so we're seeing a huge amount of regulatory change triggered by EU exit mostly, but we have kind of changing policy priorities. And in the middle of that, you've got businesses sort of saying, well, wait a minute, these are all kind of impacting against each other. They're not working together with one kind of shared ambition. So you've got businesses kind of going, what does this mean for me and what do I do? The big message we're getting just now is that we want to kind of increase exports, but then we're seeing, decreased funding for organisations like Food Standards Scotland in real times, and without official controls, we can't invest in, export health certificate sign-offs. And that's not necessarily anyone's fault, but we've forgotten about the business in the middle of that. And I think that's a really big challenge for both Westminster and Holyrood, to put businesses back in the centre of policy making. And that silo working really needs to become much more aligned and much more joined up, I think, to try and get the business environment out of this kind of stagnation that we've seen. We need to make Scotland a really good place to do business.
Hopefully with the change that's inevitably going to come with the elections that are coming up, that it will be on the agenda. And certainly in Scotland, farming and the food sector and the drink sector is so important.
Absolutely. I keep saying that we can't just put farming down to just being kind of farmers in, far-flung places of Scotland, because we are part of a multi-billion-pound manufacturing sector, and that economic growth is distributed across every single parish. So when you start to think about inside-out growth multipliers and, the power of local communities, the red meat sector gives you the platform to be able to do that, but only if we really look at working together and investing in supply chains all the way from kind of farmers and crofters all the way through to processors and manufacturing. And I think that's what I kind of often talk about. We need to sort of change the language that we use, rather than just, thinking or describing ourselves as part of the kind of farming and rural. We are a key part of that wider manufacturing industry in Scotland. And we shouldn't be afraid to know that and to prioritise that.
So Sarah, what's been keeping you busy over the last 2 weeks? I know you've had a lot on your plate as usual, but the last fortnight, what's been happening?
Oh God, what has not been happening in the last fortnight? So the team have been out and about loads over the last couple of weeks, particularly our health and education team. Our health and education powerhouse, Tracy, has engaged with nearly 1,000 pupils in the month of April, which I just think is absolutely incredible for, one human being. It's the work that people like Tracy and the rest of the team at QMS do day in, day out that make me really proud. When Kate and I were down in London last week, we've also met with a number of politicians, and we had a really good meeting with Tom Bradshaw as well, the president of NFU England. Again, a lot of the challenges that we're facing in Scotland don't just stop at the border, so we wanted to make sure there was a chance to engage. We had a really strong dialogue, things like the assurance review that are going on. Yes, we had a meeting there. We also did a blog post on LinkedIn last week about collaboration, because that seems to be the big word of the moment, I think, as I described it. So our new business plan year kicked off on the 1st of April, and obviously with this being the first year of our new 5-year strategy, we've got quite a few big projects and new ways of doing things that are being kicked off in the next few weeks and months. One which has just been released today is obviously the announcement of the new baselining project that we're working on with the HDB. So last week I spent some time down with the HDB senior team working through how we want to work together, and I think the baselining project is just one way that we can deliver value for our levy payers. What this baselining project will do will enable us to basically calculate the amount of carbon that is held in soils, in trees, in woodlands, on all that on-farm biomass, as we call it. And that's about levelling up the equation, because we all know that the work that farm animals and farmers do to create those landscapes and, effectively, create beef, lamb and pork that goes onto our plates also contributes to that sequestering and storage of carbon. So this project will help evidence that. So we've got the data to help back up what we know around Scotland being a really great place to raise livestock. So that's a really major project. If farmers are looking to get involved in that, please head to the HDB website, where you can register through their portal and register for the expression of interest. And what that will do, if you're a beef farmer or a sheep farmer or a pig farmer, that will then come through to the teams at QMS and HDB, and we'll be in contact. It's about 20 farms in total in Scotland that we're looking for. So really exciting opportunity to kind of be part of that and to be part of that kind of evidence building. And yeah, it's a project I'm really proud of, and I think it just shows that when collaboration works, it can be really, really special.
It's what the industry needs, isn't it, Sarah? We're kind of shooting into the dark a little bit, because trying to find the metrics internationally that everybody can follow is so slow. So I think having our own red meat focus for that benchmarking will just give us so much more power to be able to communicate what the industry is, what it stands for in terms of net zero ambition.
Absolutely. And this whole area of work, there's been quite a bit discussed politically about this, obviously, over the last few weeks. Effectively, the whole net zero agenda is not going to disappear. I do think that there's been a bit of recognition, particularly over the last 18 months. I often say there's two sides to the net zero discussion. There's we need to reduce emissions, which we absolutely do. But we also need to remember that the changing climate will also impact how we produce food. And in Scotland, that's really important, because we are a net food exporter. We export a lot of food down to England and into Wales, but we also export a lot of food out into the kind of global marketplace as well. And I don't think that is a good thing. I keep talking about responsible citizenship in Scotland, you know, through all the kind of hundreds of years that we've been a nation, has always been known as a socially responsible country. And I think that, you know, we've got a great opportunity under that climate change lens to continue that social responsibleness as a food producer when other parts of the world are no longer able to produce food in the same responsible way that we are because of climate change. We can help fill that, you know, provide calories to the world. You know, we're never going to be an Argentina or a Brazil, you know, in terms of production, but we're not somewhere where we want to limit production. That's one thing for sure. And actually, the more that we can produce in Scotland, the better, you know, as part of that kind of global citizenship piece. And I think that's something that helps get me out of bed every day, and trying to explain that to people that actually they want to produce more in Scotland because we know we can do it really well, even if that means that we will have more emissions sitting in that kind of food production part. We can't eliminate them, and actually for the benefit of the global population we shouldn't. That would be really dangerous. So that's been a bit of what we've been up to. One of the key things over the kind of final quarter of last year is that we're relaunching our Scotch Beef Club. So our Scotch Beef Club is basically our kind of food service offering where we provide support to chefs who use Scotch beef, Scotch lamb and specially selected pork. So in March, the team started the first relaunch over in Milan, and the concept behind it is that we're kind of picking some of the kind of global European cities and working with existing distribution routes that we know processors and wholesalers already have, and then doing a kind of launch event with existing chefs. Effectively, it's showcasing why Scotch worth paying a little bit more for, but using existing distribution routes to help minimise cost to do that. So it's a bit of a clever way of trying to increase volumes of product going into existing markets and grow the brands, you know, the why behind the brands in a really neat way. So the first one was in Milan. We've got future launches planned in London, Paris, and also Inverness as well, and so that's at the start of June. So there's quite a bit of that work that just cumulatively, you know, happens in the background. Highland shows obviously also just over a month away. I really hope the weather is just like what it was this weekend, so I've just jinxed it now. It's definitely going to rain, heard it here first. We've got quite a new team at QMS this year. We've had quite a few staff changes, so for a lot of them it's the first Highland show, so we've got some great new ideas coming forward. It's never a dull day at QMS, that is for sure, and always lots to keep us occupied.
Oh, that's brilliant, Sarah. Well, thank you so much. It's been really lovely talking to you as always.
No problem at all, and I'm looking forward to speaking to you all again in a couple of months.
Finally, I caught up with John and Alix Ritchie. Well, Alix, John, thanks ever so much for coming inside. You've probably got 101 jobs to do outside. To come in and speak to me, I'm really, really appreciative. First off, I'm going to ask you both where you are and tell us a little bit about the farm.
Okay, so we're at Montauk Farm, which is in the mighty Path of Condé, the metropolis it is. So we are South Perthshire. We're an upland farm, about 1,000 feet, beef and sheep, 100 odd suckler cows and 500 breeding ewes. I farm with Alix and my dad, and you are?
Yeah, I'm Programme Director for Farmstrong Scotland and also help out on the farm as well. We've got 2 kids, Millie and Ellie, who help out when required.
Oh, that's great. And John, grassland, it's been the bane of everybody's life, not through the grassland itself, but just the weather has just been against us all spring, hasn't it?
Yeah, I suppose it's been quite challenging, I suppose, even since it really started raining the Highland Show last year, and it's been a very wet season for us anyway, you know, right the way through the winter. We actually came out of we did our first grass measure of the farm in March, and actually because it's a wet and relatively mild winter, we carried grass quite well. Farm cover was quite strong, but like everyone else, the problem was actually trying to utilise grass was very, very difficult. We try and graze all our paddocks. They use pre-lamb, just a day's grazing, and then they're moved on. But even this year with the sheep, some of the paddocks were so wet, we never got them grazed. This is the challenge we've got going forward really just now, is that we're probably running about a week behind, but actually grass is starting to go now. We've depleted our silage stocks like many other farmers this year just because we couldn't get cattle out to grass. Probably 2 weeks. They went past the date when they would usually be out, just because ground conditions were bad. So at the moment, you know, there's this real temptation when we're shutting up silage fields and looking to do our first cut of silage. We'd usually do our first cut of silage end of May, beginning of June. It's this temptation to let that first cut bulk up. I'll worry about it later on in the season because I'm a great believer the season will sort itself out. Just trying to have conviction and do that very good quality first cut silage at the start of, end of May, beginning of June, because that's the stuff that you can feed cattle and sheep without concentrate, and, you get the performance in the winter. And really just now, it's just that juggling act. We're probably hitting magic day where demand's meeting growth, but it's just, you've got lots of stock classes at the minute. We've got young growing cattle on rotation. They're on 2-day shifts. Using lambs, we're just starting to mob them up. They're just young enough. We lamb mid-April, so you can't put them under too much pressure, but they're into mobs about 80 to 100, and then we'll get the lambs marked this week, hopefully, if it stops raining. We'll start them on a 2-day rotation. Mobs of round about 200 ewes with twins, and then we'll start dropping cows and calves coming behind to kind of tidy up. Grass is growing and quality looks good. It's just getting it out of the mindset that, winter will end and, spring will start. And the problem is we've had a month of everyone saying, oh, it's going to get better, and it hasn't. It's just kept raining. Just having a bit of confidence is to say to yourself, the sun is going to shine, the grass is going to grow, and we'll get there and sort it out. And, if silage stocks are down just now, you can sort that out later on in the season. Just prioritise those using lambs and cows and calves and get them off to a good start. So, cows will come back to the bull quick and using lambs will grow well. And even though that first cut's going to be less in quantity, make sure you can try your best to keep the quantity up. That's the stuff that makes you the money.
And John, last year you won Grassland Manager of the Year in Farmers Weekly's awards. And reading through, we'll put a link to the article about how you manage your grassland in the podcast details. Some of the performance figures that you're getting by changing your approach to how you use your grassland and manage your grassland is really impressive. Dry matter's gone up, your stocking rates have gone up, your yields have gone up. Just talk us through that system that you use, and also importantly the tools that you use, because farmers are going to need to look at building their grassland management for the long term, not just for the season.
I suppose the way we were farming before, we weren't farming in line with how the grass was growing. And it's really changing a mindset to actually say that, we're dry matter farmers. We turn sunshine into protein, and it's working out the system to suit that grass and how the grass grows and fitting the system as best as we can. I suppose the big thing for us is the infrastructure we've put in the farm. So whereas before we would set stock, we'd be putting ewes and lambs and cows and calves into fields for, a couple of weeks and then shifting them on. Now that's everything's into subdivisions. So at most the time that stock will stay in a paddock, once we get onto rotation past lambing and calving, is usually about 2 days. And that just gives grass that ability to rest, grow. And once you've got that kind of infrastructure set up, and then you can measure the amount of grass through, doing grass walks, like through what we're doing through Grass Check with a plate meter. It's a powerful, powerful bit of information to know how much feed, as in how much dry matter and grass you've got in the farm. And then you can work out an allocation. This is the 5th year now that we've been measuring grass. And having that amount of information to say, right, these points of year, we've usually got this amount of grass on farm. Then we're actually tailoring what stock is on farm at those points of the year. We're about to hit peak growth in the next 2 weeks. So I would never have enough breeding stock on farm to utilise all that growth. So like most livestock farmers, we're taking out fields for silage now. We'll drop out paddocks probably once we get into the end of May. We'll skip them. We'll take them for silage. We've trading stock on farm. There's about 70 growing cattle, R1s just now, and they're our kind of tool that we'll take out the excess by using those to graze down paddocks. And then if things come tight in the summer, the worst thing about the weather we've got just now is these extremes. We've got extreme long spells, and I would imagine we'll get an extreme dry spell at some point as well. So it just gives us this flexibility that we can trade stock. If there's not grass there, we can get rid of them, and then we can conserve silage or do what we need to do, kind of thing. It's being flexible. I think that's the biggest thing we've learned over the last 7 or 8 years since we've doing it. Having a fixed mindset to how you farm now with the climate and the weather, that's a very hard thing to stick to all the time. If you can be a bit more open-minded and say, right, no, we're going to have to adapt and change with the weather, with how the trade's happening and everything like that. I find that was a very difficult thing to do. But once you get into it and don't be frightened of it and try all these different new things, there's loads of stuff's not worked. Absolutely loads of stuff's not worked. But I'd say after 10 years, there's some of it starting to kind of get in line to how we want to farm and how the family want to farm as well.
Yeah, that's so true. Everything you've said is so true. And it touches so well on what we're going to speak to Alix about. The words that you've used throughout that. We've been talking about technical stuff, how to manage your grassland. But, you've mentioned your own well-being, that you, like every other farmer, there have been days when you're thinking, well, I'd rather be doing something else. Or have I made the right career choice? You talk about being open, sharing your mistakes, planning, keeping it simple, but also listening to those around you. And that really rung true with me, Alix, and I saw you smiling and nodding your head while John was speaking. The analogies are very, very similar for your own mental health, as well as your soil and your grassland health. Talk us through a little bit about what Farmstrong's approach is and why you think, given the last 9 months of on-off rain that we've had, it's so important for farmers and crofters.
Yeah, so Farmstrong Scotland's a wellbeing initiative, and it's really, as John was saying, and as you've mentioned, a lot of the things that John mentioned actually are tied so closely into what Farmstrong are aiming to do. So it's that knowledge transfer, that peer-to-peer support, and it's finding small things that everyone out there can do to improve their well-being. And we all know that if your well-being's better, you're more likely to make better business decisions. So as well as improving your well-being, it'll also help you improve your croft or your farm business as well. Some of the other things that John mentioned as we went through are really, really important at this time of year, particularly rest. So we know it's been a really busy time, and just making a plan to put some rest into the system. I think as farmers and crofters, we value the input time we put into our livestock. We look at the time we put into our machinery, our farm accounts, our business planning. But often the one part of the business that gets neglected is the number one asset, which is ourselves, the farmers and the crofters. And I think it's just taking a little bit of time to figure out what boosts your well-being and making time for that, which can be really difficult, particularly when you're really at the busiest time. So as the busyness starts to ease, it's just trying to build some of that into the system.
And what sort of tips have you been sharing on your social media channels and in the content that you've been putting into the press?
Yeah, so every month we're going to be sharing a story from a farmer or a crofter in the Scottish Farmer and across our social media channels and on our website. And it's just things that farmers are doing. And most of them are based around the 5 ways to wellbeing. So they are to connect, to take notice, learning, and to be active. And these can be done in whatever way suits you. So if we think about connect first, John talked about the connection through WhatsApp groups. So like-minded people connecting together. So it might be friends, or it might be people who are passionate about a grass or a particular breed or a discussion society, or it could be cars or Formula One or rugby or whatever it is. And getting that group that you can connect with, that can be on a farming basis or out of farming. Building that connection is really, really important. And as the summer shows are just starting, we've got Ayr this weekend, that's a great place to go out and connect with others and just share your stories, share the woes, and have a bit of a laugh about some of the things that have happened. And we all know that we feel better after connections. As humans, we need that connection. Taking notice is maybe something that you can build into the busier times. So it could be you're going around and checking your sheep. Hopefully the rain stopped and you can just turn the quad bike off, sit at the top of the hill and just take a couple of minutes. It could be a minute just to stop and reflect and think about some of the things that have gone well, or some of the things that you're grateful for, or just sit in peace and listen. Or you can just pause and have a look. If the cattle have just been bedded, you could just sit back and lean on the fence and have a look and see how they're looking. It's just taking a little bit of time to pause and take notice is really, really important. The third one that I mentioned there was give. So it could be like John is a mentor, so it could be giving your time to other people. It could be giving your time to pick up a phone and phone a neighbour or a relative, or it could be to support some of the wonderful organisations that we've got within agriculture or out with. So it might be that you give your time to help coach kids' football team or whatever it is. We know that when we give, we feel better for it. So building some time in for that, which I know a lot of farmers and crofters already do. Keep learning. Again, just referring back to John, I know that learning about the grassland system has been something that you continue to benefit from. You know, it could be learning through podcasts, it could be learning through books or webinars. There's so many different options out there. And again, we know that through the research that learning does help. And the last one is being active. Many farmers have probably been too active recently and are looking for a break, but that time, particularly if you can do something that you really enjoy. So whatever it is that works for you. The first story that we shared was with Hazel Moss. We've had others, Tracy Rowan, who weightlifts. And so it's just finding something that you enjoy and making that time to be active. And again, that's research driven. And that's a really important part of what we're doing at Farmstrong. So we've done our first round of monitoring and evaluation, and we're looking at just finding out what works for farmers. We're going to continue to do that. So the programme is built around what works for farmers and crofters in Scotland.
You're teaming up with other organisations. You're going to be present at a number of events, including Monitor Farm days, and also you recently ran a sauna day. I was just imagining that, a bunch of farmers sitting in a sauna together. Did make me chuckle. But yeah, you're being really imaginative about what you're doing, which I love. And, that vibrancy hopefully will encourage people, to come and have a little bit of fun, as well as to do the important things, to talk to one another, to learn about some of the tools and how other people use them and what they do to bring them a little bit of joy on a dark day. So tell us a little bit about the events.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just start with the Monitor Farm, because that's a program that I personally think is fantastic, because you're connecting. So we talked about that as one of the benefits. You're learning. You're also being active, because there's usually a farm walk involved. So that's 3 of the 5 ways of wellbeing at one event. And I know that John or myself, when we go to any of these sorts of events, these learning knowledge transfer events, you do come back feeling re-energized. And you're also getting time off the farm, so that when you come back, you've had a bit of a break. So they're a really great opportunity to boost your wellbeing. I know there's lots coming up, so it's worth checking out the dates and see what's in your area.
Yeah, I think everywhere that I've visited in the world, there is a stigma associated with saying, I need a bit of help, I'm not feeling at my best. It's just part of farming, roughy tufty, out there in all weather, getting things done. There isn't time and space to spend on yourself. What would you say to that view?
I think if you consider it as an investment, so if you just really simply took a bit of paper and divided it into 4 and said, how much time am I investing in my livestock? How much time am I investing in machinery? How much time am I investing in my family? How much time am I investing in my business? And then you were to think about how much time you're investing in yourself. And I think a lot of people would be quite surprised how little time they are taking to invest. Now, we all know, me included, that when you take time to do the things that you enjoy, you feel better. You feel better, you're a better person to be around, your business does better. So it makes good personal sense, but it also makes good business sense. I think if we can start thinking of it as an investment, then we can really benefit from it. And I'm saying this as somebody who doesn't always make time for my own well-being. I know it's difficult. I know it's challenging. I've got my work and the farm and the kids and other volunteering options, and it can be really difficult. But I know myself that if I do make time for my well-being, I feel better afterwards. And I think it's just trying to remember that. And if you have to put it into your diary, then put it in there and just tell everybody that's what you're doing. Write it down somewhere so that you're committing to it, and just try and take a little bit of time each day to think about yourself and how you can invest in your own well-being.
Oh, it's a lovely note to end on. Thank you, Alix. Very wise words. And thank you, John, for your passion about grassland. It's infectious. When you hear somebody talking about something that they passionately believe in, you believe in it yourself.
I'd say that's probably where it all started from you. It was hearing other people talking passionately about grassland.
When you hear someone else, I'll be honest, you hear some of the stuff, you're like, nah, that's never going to work. I can't believe that. That sounds too good to be true. And then you actually start doing stuff. I was extremely fortunate to be involved in the QMS grazing groups, the old grass groups that'd be, I'm not sure now, 7 or 8 years ago. So we had a host, it was Alec Brewster at Rockmell, we had a host farmer and really good facilitators and a great bunch of farmers. They were there off their own backs because they wanted to change, they wanted to see what this grassland management was about. And, doing that as part of that group was fun. Doing something on your own is never fun because, you've not got someone to bounce ideas off and get advice and things like that. So that was fundamental to how we've kind of changed things here. It's certainly not all been plain sailing, but it's definitely been fun to do. And it makes farming a bit more exciting when you can change a system and be a bit more open-minded to think, how is this going to fit in with family and everything else?
Oh, that's just lovely. Really lovely to hear. Well, thank you both very much.
Okay.
Thanks, Jane.
Thanks, Jane. Cheers.
Thanks to John and Alix. There's so much food for thought there. And thank you for listening to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast. You'll find the latest industry news and links to listen back to previous episodes of the podcast on the QMS website. And for recipe inspirations, go to scotchkitchen.com or follow Scotch Kitchen on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. Thank you for listening.